Good morning, everyone. My name is David Saginaw. I'm the president of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey. Thank you for taking the time this morning to join us with a quick briefing of the trip that Dov Ben-Shimon and I made at the beginning of the week to Poland and to the Ukraine border. While we are talking, Dov and I, and making our little presentations, I encourage all of you, if you have any questions, please go to the Q&A portion of your screen, type them in, they will get forwarded to us and we'll try and answer them. We're not gonna make this a whole presentation in terms of what we experienced, what we saw. We do want a lot of Q&A, so please, I encourage you to do so. So, if it were 50 years ago, missions like this, even 30 years ago, the purpose of us going, and JFNA, the Jewish Federation of North America, organized this trip for around a dozen large city CEOs and their respective presidents to see what was happening on the ground in Poland and by the Ukraine border. In today's day and age of technology and 24/7 news, everybody sees, we think, everything. But we really wanted to go there and to phrase it how the president of the Pittsburgh Jewish Federation said, Mr. Rogers had a very, very famous line of his that when bad things happen, look for the helpers. That's what we were doing. Dov and I had ample time to meet with the Jewish Agency for Israel and JDC and visit with some, not a lot, of Ukrainian refugees to hear some of their stories, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But we really wanted to go there to show solidarity to JDC and Jaffe, our two major historic partners in our overseas efforts that we fund through our UJA campaign, and to come back to our communities and let people know from our perspective, in addition to what you may be seeing on the news 24/7, what this means to us, how this affects our federation, how it affects the diaspora and certainly the North American Jewish community. There are a lot of questions, a lot of things that are being done, a lot of questions that are being asked. I've already had a bunch about resettlement of refugees like we did, in the FSU in the 90s, all these different things, put them in the Q&A. I promise you, Dov and I won't have answers to all of them, but we'll do our best because I know these things are on your mind and we talked about them. And the other thing I would do before I turn it over to Dov is I would say Joyce Sisiski, who was a former colleague of mine, is now the interim CEO at the San Francisco Federation. Some of you have seen her post. I reposted it on Facebook. She, and I'm quoting her, when she was asked to describe the situation there, she said, "It's the purity of human decency in a very complicated place." And I think that summarizes what we observed. And Dov and I will get into more specific stories in a bit. So Dov, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, David. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all. We're going to start with a 2-minute video just to give you a taste of what we saw and the experiences we had. So watch this with us, and then we'll dive in a little further.
What we've seen in the past 24 hours has been completely surreal. People crossing the border, picking up their entire lives and coming to freedom. The looks of uncertainty with a single suitcase, a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter coming across just to flee the war right now.
These are people who are leaving a war zone, don't know whether they're leaving for 2 weeks or for the rest of their lives.
It's women and children coming through, and this represents families that have been ripped apart and have left people behind.
What I've seen has been beyond inspiring. The numbers of volunteers that are here to help, the quiet, organized way in which people are being handled.
The services, the minute they walk over the border, are enormous. They're housing all these refugees in huge empty malls and hotels and Airbnbs. It's just overwhelming.
The volunteers are making all of this happen.
I think the takeaway for me is just
the incredible suffering going on and the fact that we as a Jewish community are here via the JDC, via the Jewish Agency, being able to take care of them. And this is remarkable.
With your permission, what I'd like to do now, and bear with me because they didn't hire me as exec for my technological capacities, is show you a map to make sure that we are all on the same page. Let's see if this map works. Here we go. David, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see this map?
Yep.
Okay, so here we are, everyone. This is Ukraine. The big, the small area at the top is the wider area of Ukraine, and the square is where the fighting is, just to give you a concept of what we're looking at. This is from the New York Times a couple of hours ago. So to remind you, 2014, the Russian invasion of Crimea and the Donbass, which is here, it's Lugansk and Donetsk. The fighting, as you can see, is essentially, in Hebrew, you would say it's a calf, right? You'd say it's this big kind of side turn semicircle where the Russians are essentially moving in on Russian-speaking areas. And the reason for that is if you look at the Dnieper River, which is here, as you can see in my arrow, the Dnieper River is kind of a dividing line of Ukraine between the Russian-speaking industrialized East and the Ukrainian agrarian West, which looks much more to Europe. That includes much of Kiev up here in the north. That 40-50 mile convoy that you were all reading about was here, has essentially dispersed, but was kept very well by the Ukrainians in position, occasionally picking it off, so that the Russians wouldn't have enough time and resources to refuel and bring more ammunition and more supplies. And parts of that 40-mile convoy are still dispersed in the area, all the way stretching now down to Zhytomyr. The main areas of fighting, Kherson has been overtaken. Most military analysts are saying that Kryvyi is going to be the next target. We originally thought that the concept would be to overtake Odessa and push towards Moldova. Now it seems much clearer that the Russian attempt is going to be to make this wide semicircle more solid for Russians to invade further, especially around the area of Kharkiv and pushing south from Cherniv down to Kiev. So just one other point about Ukraine. I'll stop sharing so we can see each other. Ukraine, as you may probably know, is massive. It is the largest country in Europe. If you say Eurasia, then Russia is the largest, and then Ukraine. About 250,000 square miles, about the size of Texas. As you can see, that division between the Russian-speaking East and the Ukrainian-speaking West. The word, I think some of you have heard me talk about this before, the word Ukraina in Slavic actually means borderland, because it's a completely indefensible country, and over the centuries has been overtaken again and again and invaded again and again, because there's no defensible borders. It's all a single borderland that's overtaken through the centuries. That also means a couple of things, just to give you that historical perspective. There is a history of bloodshed. There is a history of death and warfare and pain and suffering for the Ukrainian people as a whole, right? If you look at the Holodomor, which was the famine caused by Stalin, 1932 to 33, 9 million Ukrainians died in 1 year in 1932. And the famine, somewhere between 8 and 15 million Ukrainians died in the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War. People will say, you know, Chernobyl, April 1986, only 31 people died, but 650,000 Ukrainians were forced to go in cleanup squads into Chernobyl. And we know what happened to them. They all died of radiation poisoning afterwards. For the Jews, we count 200,000 Jews, and that's the number that our colleagues and our international partners, the Joint and the Jewish Agency, as well as the Israeli consulates and Chabad use, we all say approximately 200,000 self-identifying Ukrainian Jews. Also a history of pain, a history of suffering, and much of it is because in the last 70 years, during communism, the 70 years of communism, Jews weren't allowed to identify as Jews. They couldn't even mourn their own dead after the Second World War. We met with a man who lived across the road from Babi Yar, now we call it Babin Yar. And it was a good reminder that at places where Jews wanted to memorialize their dead, that the Soviets would put up these grudging little memorials to the victims of fascism, and not even to Jews. So a lot of Jewish life today is revolving once again around the memories of the past and the need to reconnect to Ukrainian Jewish history. David, you're going to tell us a little bit about someone you met, and then we'll carry on further. And a reminder to people, we're seeing some chats coming in, and we're going to tackle those soon.
Right. Dov, before you put the picture up, I just want, just for everybody's edification, you know, the JDC and Jaffe had really 5 priorities in this crisis: evacuate people from Ukraine, from danger, help those that are still in Ukraine. They still have staff both in Ukraine, on that's the other side of the border, helping those not only who want to leave, to get to the border, to get through the border, but also the ones who are still staying, who cannot leave, because as you know, or if you don't, if you are a male between the ages of, I think it's 18 and 60, you cannot leave the country. You have to stay and fight and defend your country. So on all these pictures that you're seeing, you know, they're of women and of children. There are no adult men. And that's because they're staying to defend their country. So evacuate, deliver supplies over the border to the people who are there to continue to support them who can't get out yet. Helping the Jews in Russia is also something that JDC and Jaffe have staff there. Okay, those are issues also. People in Russia are going to want, Jews are going to want to leave also. So that's another part of the puzzle. And of course, any Jew who crosses the border, okay, we are going to help, and other people, in addition to non-Jews, we don't turn anybody away. But the one thing that you can count on is that any Jew, okay, who wants to leave, we're getting out, okay? And it's just an incredible thing what's happening. And I just want to talk about volunteerism for a second, because on our flight over, we were talking in the lounge, and there were 2 guys, you know, independent guys, and they overheard us talking, and they have 2 independent guys, each of them flying over to bring supplies. They're not the members of any particular major nonprofit. They felt a need to go over there and do whatever they could. And it was just incredible. And when we got there, we saw a lot more of what was going on. The scenes that you'll see in terms of the train station, in terms of the malls that they've converted in with beds and places for people to sleep. It's just incredible what the volunteer community of Poland is doing and how they've responded to all of this. As a matter of fact, when you look at, I think, Dov, we're probably looking at one of those videos that when the refugees cross over into Poland, go through the gate and have about a quarter-mile walk to get to the buses and to queue up in lines, it's almost as if you're at a convention. There are tents and booths that have everything under the sun you can imagine that they want to give to these refugees to make their lives a little bit better, since they've just endured, you know, incredible hardship. And I want to point something out, that as much as we were able to see the refugees walking across after they leave the border crossing from Ukraine to Poland, the Ukraine part got out, then they walk along about a half-a-mile corridor, you know, cobblestone, to get to the gate of the Polish border. And when they enter Poland, now they are legitimately free, and people give them water, people give them food, pizza, they entertain the children. And at the end, what they have to do is they have to get in line, and the lines are sometimes of hundreds and sometimes even more than that, to eventually get onto buses to go to different places they're going. And I just want to give you a sense of what the JDC and Jaffe have been doing to enable that to happen in Ukraine. So they have hotlines that they've publicized. They drop flyers in all communities with the hotlines. You know, people have cell phones in Ukraine. And so they will call the hotline, say where they are, when they hope that they can cross the border. And there will be people waiting at the border on the Polish side, okay, waiting for them, because they say, we're coming out, we want to go to Israel, whatever the case may be. So there's a direct contact there. And I will tell you that the Polish volunteers are just incredible. It's volunteerism like we know in our blood, being involved in Federation. This is unprecedented. And what was interesting that drove that is we heard from the chief rabbi of Poland on Monday night. And he said, you know, for years, for decades, Poland has always been on the receiving end of aid and services and everything else politically, just the way that things have been for that country. He said now they have the opportunity to be providers. And so they've seen this incredible outpouring. The government is doing a lot of things, but most of the lion's share of the work is coming from the volunteers who feel they have this visceral need to help. And it was just amazing. So Dov, if you wanted to, I'll just tell you, one particular story. So this we were at the Lublin Yeshiva, and you have to understand that most of the refugees are reluctant to speak. Here we were, a group of 25 people. They don't speak English. So need translation, and we're sort of saying, how are you doing, and what can you share? And the woman in the middle is the mother. The woman to her left is her daughter, and the young lady to the right is her granddaughter. So we have 3 generations here. They had to leave, as the stories that I'm sure you're going to hear all the time. They had 15 minutes to pack up because bombs were falling. Their husbands, packed them into the car, drove as fast as they could to get away from harm's way. And of course, they had one little suitcase, a carry-on, if you will, and a coat. And, the husbands took them as far as they could, and then they had to say goodbye. And as you can imagine, they don't know what their fate is going to be or what's going to happen. And the mother in the middle was telling all this through a translator. And at some point she choked up, and her daughter to her left, expressed the same sentiments in terms of how they felt. They're leaving their country that they love. They don't know what they're going to do. I don't believe that they even knew what was going to happen after they left the yeshiva, which is run by JDC as sort of a hotel and a hostel. They get food, they get rooms, they get a cell phone, they get all these things in order to survive until they can decide what they want to do. But what was really interesting is after the mother and the daughter spoke, and they appreciated everything that the volunteers and that the country of Poland was doing, the granddaughter in the black started to speak English, which we all sort of were a little taken back because up until then, everything is Ukrainian. And she basically said that the outpouring of love and warmth and compassion of the Polish people, which she had never experienced before. She lived in Ukraine. She said, if anything ever happens to Poland and they need people, I'll be the first in line. And this is the type of mentality that's going on in terms of how the Poles are demonstrating to the Ukrainians, their compassion about what they are going through. And it's transforming the country, certainly in terms of volunteers. So Dov, if you want to.
Thank you. Yeah, so bear with me, everybody, because I'm going to find one more photo and then we're going to answer some questions from you. I wanted to show you one extra person that we met with, and let's see if this works.
And Dov, while you're doing it, let me say one other thing, just in case, I'm sure it's on your mind. When people come out to Poland, they basically are in 3 situations. They can make Aliyah to Israel. They can stay in Poland because they never want to go back, or go somewhere else because they never want to go back to Ukraine, or, and I have a vast majority, want to go back home after the hostilities are over with. This is their country that they left to get out of harm's way. So they're arriving, not necessarily knowing not only what the future is going to bring, but it's among these 3 options that that they have to consider, and we'll get into in a second, I'm sure, Q&As, what the Jewish Agency and JDC is doing for the ones who want to make Aliyah.
Right.
Okay, Doc.
So this is Ina. She is a mother of 2 small children. She has a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. I think they were fast asleep in another room. What's really interesting here is this was a meeting we had in Warsaw in a hotel, one of 5 hotels that were taken over by another of our partners, the Jewish Agency for Israel. And in a single section of the area, the conference room, the banquet rooms that they had taken over, there is essentially an Israeli consulate fully functioning as sovereign Israeli territory. And the coordination between, especially our 2 main partner agencies, the Joint and the Jewish Agency, is so excellent that they are handing off between each other the casework for different refugee families, depending on where the families think that they will want to go. So for example, if the joint gets somebody in Lublin, which is where David was talking about the previous family, and the family says, we want to make Aliyah, they are transferred seamlessly to the caseworkers at the Jewish Agency who work with the Israelis. And we know of at least 2,500 Jews who have made Aliyah in the last 2 weeks. There will be thousands more, and 10,000 Ukrainian Jews who have been helped by the joint with relief programs, with food, with shelter, and so on and so forth. Ina is from Dnipro, which used to be called Dnipropetrovsk. It's on the Dnieper River. I just want to read from you a little bit because I was writing very fast because I wanted to capture some of her words. She said, 3 weeks ago, our lives were wonderful. Part of our family lived in Israel. Everything was great. None of us could believe that something like this would happen. Remember that the date of the war starting is February the 24th. So February 24th, the war started. We still couldn't believe that it was happening. We didn't really understand it until March the 1st. That's when the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was attacked by the Russians. We had been sheltering in place for some bomb attacks. Dnipro was not heavily bombed in the first few days of the war, but then the bombing started and Ina did not have a bomb shelter in the house. She, like many others that we had heard, had to shelter under the stairs with her 2 little kids and her husband. My husband said to me, you've got 15 minutes, pack what you need and go. But of course, remember what David said, if you're a man, you can't leave. There is a clause, an exemption that says if you have 3 or more kids, you're allowed to leave Ukraine. What we heard was some of the border guards don't know this, and there's a huge bottleneck at the border. It took Ina and her 3-year-old and 6-year-old several days to get to Lviv, which is the western large city with a huge number, hundreds of thousands of internal migrants inside Ukraine, 2 more days to get to the border, and another day and a half to get across the border. And at the border and various other places, there were people with signs and notifications for anyone who was Jewish to come and get help. From there, one of our partner agencies brought Ina and her 2 kids to this hotel in downtown Warsaw. Now she has shelter, she has food. She doesn't know what's going to go on next. She's also waiting to hear from her husband, which gives you a sense of, I think, from my perspective, the 2 most striking things that I saw at the border and with the treatment of refugees. Actually, I'll say 3. First is it's nearly all women and children. There are almost no men who are coming across. When we were at the border crossing, we saw, I don't think any men that were coming across. It's mostly women and children. Second is the exhaustion. Just think about what I just said, that like you get 15 minutes, you might pack a suitcase. I don't even know if Ina packed a suitcase because she was holding 2 kids. So they are literally coming with nothing. And third, I would say to you is what the point that we haven't fully touched on, but I know from myself, and I think I can speak in David's name too, is just the resounding, incredible nature of humanity on a positive level from the professionals with whom we work, but we saw volunteers from all over the world who are giving out food, who are helping with shelter, who were setting up medical clinics. There was an incredibly inspiring aspect to see that nature in the Warsaw bus station with volunteers all over trying to help people, strollers lined up, free food, free toys. At Warsaw train station, there was a line of people with bags, and you realize those are Polish people bringing cooked food to be donated. If you're a Ukrainian, you just come and take whatever you want at Warsaw train station. So that for me was very inspiring. David, do you want to make a final comment and then we'll head to some Q&A?
Yes, a couple of things. One, for those of us who have been on missions before and have seen and been inspired by the caseworkers on the ground, not only FSU, but all around the world from JDC and the Jewish Agency, we know that they are, every day they do heroic work. And as we like to say in terms of what we do in our federation and the UJA campaign, that enables us to have the organization the day before crises hit, that we can then pivot on and deploy resources accordingly, but we're definitely not starting from point zero. And so there are, as I mentioned before, there are still JDC and GFE professionals on the ground in Ukraine making all this happen. By the time we see them walk across the border down that corridor, they've already endured all the real hardships, right? When they finally walk across, they're walking slowly. They're very quiet, as Dov said. They're exhausted. But and I agree with Dov. The whole concept of cooperation, voluntarism, and the fact that things are going to get done, they need to get done. And one thing that came up all the time, and sometimes I think people mistaken it and make the wrong statement. If only 80 years ago these organizations were there. These organizations were there 80 years ago. Okay. The two major differences is, one, the state of Israel is here so that people can't escape somewhere that they're not going to be turned away, and we don't have to get into the stories about World War II. Okay, so that is number one, that there is a place where they can go, that they will be accepted. Okay, and two, in my opinion, the big difference is that at this point in time, the global Jewish, and particularly the North American Jewish community, is the wealthiest community in time. And we have the resources to make things happen over and above what happens on a 24/7 basis normally. And these are the types of things that becomes our responsibility in terms of the diaspora Jewish community, to help make sure that resources are raised and they're allocated so that Jews can be saved, so that it's not the same as 80 years ago. And then in fact, every Jew who wants to come out gets out and either makes Aliyah or does what they want to do, but we save them and we have the ability to do that. So that was sort of my perspective of what I came away from. And I think it was true with everybody on our particular mission. And just so you know, JFNA is running 3 more missions before Pesach. Same type of thing that we were doing, so that people can come back, educate their communities on what's happening. And again, this is going to be no matter when the war ends, these things are going to need to occur in order to help change and save people's lives. So Dov, let's do
So I'm going to answer some of these questions real fast because we've kind of touched on them, and because we can give you quick answers, and then we'll slow down on 1 or 2 of them. Linda, how long do you think these relief efforts are sustainable? We are not even at the end of the beginning on this. Remember, there is a bottleneck in Poland, right? There are 2 main bottlenecks. One is Moldova, one is Poland. Moldova, because it's a country of barely 3.5 million people with 300,000 plus refugees. It's not a member of the European Union. They've all got to go west at some point. Poland, I mean, it's something like an 1/8 of the population of Poland right now, of Warsaw right now, is Ukrainian. That bottleneck has to go west. This is going to be a massive long-term program, even if the war ends tomorrow, which it won't. There are millions of refugees, there are millions of internally displaced that will need resettlement and will need assistance. We are not seeing anywhere near the beginning of the end of this, certainly probably not even the end of the beginning. That also means, Roberta, we will reconnect with HIAS. Our federation has funded HIAS for many years. We have a strong relationship with HIAS. We are not yet ready to talk about the resettlement or the settlement of Ukrainian refugees in the United States. As you probably know, the European Union has put forward a very generous visa waiver program. The British government has not. The US government is deliberating. I'm sure that they will do the right thing. There is a concept of temporary presence that the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas have decided to do. So yes, when we get to that, we're not ready yet. No one is ready there. Jay, very quickly, non-Jewish but religiously based agencies collecting and directing aid. David and I saw the Sikh community very well represented at the border. I do know that Caritas, which is Catholic Relief, and the Lutheran Relief were very prominent at the border too. I don't know if they were collecting their co-religionists and directing them to aid. I did see them giving out aid significantly.
Right. I think that was the nature of it also, Dov. And by the way, just so everybody knows, I can't see these questions. Only Dov can. That's why I'm not answering.
I'm not making them up. They're on the Q&A.
I just want to make sure everybody has an idea.
All right. So we've got a couple of questions on Cherkasy. David, do you want to answer? Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll chime in.
So here's what, and some of you saw on social media that 100 members of the community were able to get out, and they were celebrating Purim in Israel yesterday. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Tanya, for noting this. Here's the situation that you have to understand. When we talk about the Ukraine Relief Fund and the work of the United Jewish Appeal in funding the Ukrainian refugees, we're not neglecting the fact that there are 30,000 elderly Ukrainian Jews staying in place in the big cities, and that includes Cherkasy. There are still hundreds of elderly, frail Jews who are not leaving the big cities. That means they have to have food, they have to have medicine, they have to have home care, they have to be checked in on. One of the things we saw in 2014 with the Russian invasion in Crimea and Donbass was several of our partner agencies' caseworkers were killed by the Russians trying to traverse through the firing lines. The difference here has been what we've encouraged our partners and our partner agencies, especially the Joint with its Chesed welfare system, has done is putting these caseworkers in the homes of the elderly and just paying them a little extra to sleep in the homes of the frail elderly, especially Holocaust survivors. That is the case in Cherkasy too. There are fewer Holocaust survivors in Cherkasy, but honestly, if you're 90 years old, you're going to need the same level of help and support. So remember, when we talk about Ukrainian relief, it's not just transportation, logistics, security, food, medicine, and care for the migrants and for the internally displaced in the west of Ukraine. It's also for the thousands and thousands of elderly Jews in places like Cherkasy who are still there. Cherkasy has not been heavily bombed. It has not been heavily attacked. It has been attacked. There were some rockets falling nearby. There has been a threat warning. Thank you for Paula for pointing this out. There is a threat warning because it is getting, the fighting lines are getting closer and closer to Cherkasy, which is about 2 hours east-southeast of Kiev. More and more of Ukraine is turning into a bombing area, even though the main fighting is ground warfare and not air warfare. And that's our worry right now for Cherkasy. David, did you want to add?
No, I was going to say, I'm just sort of the same thing, that everybody right now is safe. We're in constant contact with them through the different means, and we disseminate information whenever we get it. But right now, everybody appears to be okay.
Okay, so we've got two. I'm going to do a quick answer to Robbie about how big is the Jewish community in Poland, how hospitable has the country been in recent years to Jews. Jewish community in Poland is about 9,000, depending on how you count and how they self-identify. Some of those are expats. David and I met with the chief rabbi, Rabbi Michael Shudrich, and as David said, like he rightly said that many of these countries, Moldova, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Poland, who are now taking in refugees, for decades have been recipient communities. They've been receiving aid from the Jewish Federation system and from our partners. And now we're partnering with them so that they can take in refugees and they can help. Just as a point that Chief Rabbi Shudrich said that I think is worth noting, we don't check, and David mentioned this, we don't check if you're Jewish when you're coming in to get support from the Joint or the Jewish Agency. We're assuming most people get there because they know who we are and how they can get help from a Jewish organization. And I thought the Chief Rabbi put this in a really elegant and humanitarian appropriate way. He said, I don't know if every one of the people that comes to our facilities is Jewish, but I do know that everyone is a child of God and created in the divine image. I think we've got we've got a couple of minutes left. Peggy, this is a great question. The best way to contribute, money, food, supplies, where would we send our support? So I have a strong opinion on this. I got to tell you, notwithstanding the fact that there are a very small number of ways to collect goods and bring them to the front lines where refugees are collected, it is nearly always incredibly expensive to store, to transport, to distribute, to organize packs of diapers, winter clothes, cans of beans. There are a very small number of exceptions. We work with AFIA, which has its own medical flights where they send huge crates of medical supplies. You know, David and I went, so we brought huge duffel bags of diapers and medical supplies. Nearly all of that, though, is incredibly expensive. It's not a very economic way to do it, to fly on LOT Polish Airlines and bring a couple of duffel bags each of supplies. That's not going to make the impact that people think it is. The best way you can help is money. And remember, too, what charities right now on the ground need is money for some of the things that you don't necessarily want to collect, but we actually need, right? We need to send people across the border. We need to provide security for Jewish organizations. We need to pay for buses to get people to the border, across the border, from the border to a shelter. We need to pay for local food, which isn't the same as the food you want to get rid of from your kitchen. And we need to pay for appropriate clothing. I saw, you know, God bless, they were collecting scarves and gloves, but it's actually really warm in Poland. Like we brought, you know, it was kind of, the weather was lovely. Anyone that was collecting winter clothes now, I don't know what they're going to do with them. So look, obviously our pitch in about 3.5 minutes with our campaign chair, Michael Goldberg, will be for the Ukraine Relief Fund and the United Jewish Appeal, because you can see what we are spending the money on. You can find exactly how that money is being spent. And I think from my perspective as the chief professional officer of the Federation, what has been most impactful was a statement of a unified Jewish community that immediately, thanks to David's leadership and the leadership of our board, sent $500,000 on, I think, the second day of the war to our partners and just said, go, we trust you, we believe in you, report back to us later. We didn't need to start the Ukraine Relief Fund for several days after that, because we were already sending money from our own emergency reserves. And that, I think, is a testament to the fact that we have a strong United Jewish Appeal in a community like ours.
Yeah, I would just add to that, and then you can let Michael, is that in terms of that, and I totally agree with Dov, this is about, look, open your mailbox, both your snail mail from the US Postal System and your emails. We're getting, and on Facebook, you're getting appeals from every organization under the sun. At the end of the day, people, you know, hopefully will be contributing to organizations that they trust. And that's what I think all these years, coming on 100 years with our centennial, that the Federation has built on year after year after year, is that trust. With Dov and I think one of the reasons we went over there, not that we did not trust JDC and the Jewish Agency, we wanted to see physically what they were doing, the incredible work that they're doing, and bring that message back, because this is all about what they are doing. It's not about us. Our job here, okay, is to raise whatever funds we can in order to enable them to save Jews. And in this particular situation, you know, so many are going to come to make Aliyah to Israel because there is an Israel for them to go to, as I said before, where they will not be turned away. So that's my impression overall.
I think it's only left for me just to say a final word of gratitude to our professional colleagues in the agencies on the ground and here at Federation, and our volunteer leadership who have just again and again inspired us by doing the right thing and showing a really powerful element of what Jewish unity and Jewish community could look like. And with that, and I apologize because there are loads and loads of questions. We will do more briefings. If you're not signed up for Federation updates, we'll get to that. And more importantly, it's my privilege to invite Michael Goldberg, who is our UJA campaign chair, to say a few words.
Thank you, Dov and David, and also to Mark Wilf, who as chair JFNA organized this trip. Ukraine is not a distant country. Our greater Metro West community considers Cherkasy our sister community, where many of us have traveled since the 1990s. And Ed Frankel, a community leader, is board chair of Tikva, a children's home in Odessa, where everyone was evacuated to safety in other countries. As Dov has said, this is a community that steps up when called. It is part of our collective Jewish duty and history to help each other whenever there is a fellow Jew in need. Here in Greater Metro West, our Federation and Jewish Community Foundation has already raised and granted over $2 million from over 1,500 donors in emergency relief to our partners working on the ground in Ukraine. For that I say thank you. As we think of the needs that will emerge for the thousands who have been displaced and for those who will stay, I am inspired by our Federation's ability to respond. As a homebody who doesn't like to travel, I can't imagine being uprooted from where I live and being displaced in another country. So personally, I can't understand how psychologically these people are living day to day. We are only able to mount these emergency efforts because of the strength of our UJA annual campaign. The UJA campaign that builds our partnerships in places like Ukraine before crisis strikes. We are able to respond so quickly, as Dov and David saw, only because our Federation partners were already there weeks and years ago. This same annual campaign allows us to respond on multiple fronts at one time. From facing the ongoing effects of the COVID pandemic right here in New Jersey, to supporting our elderly and Holocaust survivors, we must continue to build vibrant Jewish life. The annual campaign and our goal to raise 21 million will ensure that we can meet all of these needs. When people want to help, but don't know where or how to give, we are the place, the trusted place where they can give and know that their dollars will go right where the needs are. Please consider helping meet our community's needs by contributing to this year's UJA annual campaign. We should all be proud to live in a place that cares and responds so quickly. Thank you and Shabbat Shalom.